You ever heard the name Jennifer Schuett?
Yes.
I can tell, obviously, this affects you a lot, but I think you would, if you were to see her, I think you would be extremely proud of her.
She's alive.
Yes, she's alive.
She's alive.
She's alive. Let me tell you, she is a incredible young.
When a child goes missing, we won't deny the terrifying thought that crosses our minds. Will they ever be seen again? And if they are, will they be one of the lucky ones who make it home alive? This case is every parent's worst nightmare. It is a case that will make you never want to leave your child's bedroom window open ever again. This is the case of Jennifer Schuett. My name is Zach, and you are watching Crime Origin. The disappearance of Jennifer Schuett. Jennifer Schuett was just like any other bright 8-year-old girl, cute as a button, full of imagination, and as smart as they come. She lived in a small apartment in the city of Dickinson, Texas, with her mother, Elaine, who had been raising her as a single parent for most of her life. Jennifer loved her mother, and they were inseparable. So much so that Jennifer insisted on sleeping in her mother's room at night to give herself comfort from her fear of the dark. Elaine did not mind her daughter's sleeping habit, as they were truly that close, even finding some comfort in it herself. During the summer break of 1990, Jennifer was enjoying herself just like any other child in the United States. Everything was as it always was, and life had never been more usual for her or her mother. On August 9th, that summer break, as the sun began to set and another normal day drew to a close, Jennifer and her mother got ready for bed. As her eyes got sleepy, Jennifer climbed into the safety of her mother's bed, as she did so many nights before. At first, her mother did not question her, and they both fell asleep. However, as Jennifer tossed and turned in the summer heat, her mother's sleeping was ever interrupted. At 2:30 a.m., Elaine finally had enough and quietly asked her daughter if she felt brave enough to sleep in her own room for the rest of the night. Her sleep was imperative as she faced an early start and a busy work schedule in the morning. Despite Jennifer's fears of the dark, she decided to be a big girl and brave the night to sleep in her own room for her mother's sake. She went into her room and fell asleep in her own bed after counting the coins in her piggy bank. The next morning, Elaine woke up and began getting ready for her busy day. She went to Jennifer's bedroom door and opened it to wake up her daughter. But instead of that smiling face she expected to see, what she discovered was every parent's worst nightmare. On August 10th, 1990, Elaine opened her beloved daughter's door only to find the bed empty and the window wide open. She immediately knew that this was an emergency, as it was not like Jennifer to rebel or run away. Jennifer was known to be incredibly smart for her age, and she loved her mother dearly. Elaine rushed inside, checking in the cupboards, looking under the bed, all while calling out her daughter's name. To no avail. Within a minute, she was on the phone calling the local authorities, telling them that her daughter was missing. Upon arrival, police found Elaine in a frantic state, urgently trying to put together a search party to help look for Jennifer. They searched all day and into the afternoon with no sign of Jennifer anywhere. The discovery of Jennifer's body. At about 6:30 p.m. later that day, after Jennifer had been declared missing for quite some time, a small group of children were playing a game of hide and seek in a field just outside of the city. One of the boys was looking for a place to hide, running around through the long grass of the field. As he ran, he giggled in delight until the unexpected happened. He tripped over something in the field and fell to the ground. After the fall, the boy looked down to see what he had tripped over. He quickly screamed in horror as he looked down at the body of a little girl lying naked with her throat slit from ear to ear and red fire ants crawling all over her. The boy quickly got up and ran to get help, crying in a state of complete shock. Back in the city, Elaine could not allow her worry to subside. It had been many hours since she found Jennifer's bed empty, and she was trying not to think of the worst for her precious daughter. Suddenly, the phone rang, and Elaine's heart sank in worry as she answered. On the phone, police shared the news that Jennifer had been found but had sustained life-threatening injuries. However, Jennifer was still alive and would not be giving up her fight for survival. She was airlifted by authorities and taken to the John Seeley Hospital on Galveston Island, where doctors immediately began to perform life-saving surgery to try to keep little Jennifer from succumbing to her injuries. Her mother rushed to the hospital to see her daughter and make sure she was okay. But upon reaching her daughter's hospital room, authorities would not allow her through the door due to the extremely distressing state that her daughter was in. The girl with no voice. After her surgeries were successfully completed and Jennifer began to regain consciousness, the plot about what had happened to her that night quickly thickened. The minute she realized where she was and saw all the male doctors and policemen in her room and around her bed, she went into a frenzied state of panic. She tried to scream, but nothing came out as she realized her voice was completely gone. Her voice box had been sliced almost directly in half by her attacker, and the surgeons had no hope of her voice ever returning. With the severity of the attack, Dickinson Police Department dispatched an entire squad to serve her room and help get any information they could from young Jennifer. However, this increased police activity only seemed to send the poor girl into a deeper state of panic than before, revealing a clue that would start to make a lot more sense very soon. Eventually, authorities allowed her mother into the room as they realized little Jennifer clearly had something to say and that she simply would not cooperate with any of the male investigators. Everyone besides her mother was a suspect in her eyes. During the attack, Jennifer made it her mission to remember as many details of the event as she possibly could in hopes of being able to help the police catch whoever did this to her. So after being handed paper and a pen, Jennifer began to scribble any and every detail she could muster about what happened and about her attacker. She was able to remember everything about that night, down to the beer her attacker was drinking, the brand of cigarettes he was smoking, and even give the detectives a name. On one piece of paper, she wrote down the following. He said his name was Dennis, and then she tried to draw his face, trying to explain to investigators what her attacker looked like so she could make sure he was captured and she would be safe again. Her written description of him was so detailed and clear that without saying a single word, she was able to help sketch artist create this image. Unfortunately, police didn't think the case was strong enough to find any leads. They shared the sketch with the public to no avail and went on to uncover nothing useful at the time except for some pieces of clothing lying in the field where they found Jennifer, including her pink pajama top she wore to bed that night, her underwear all cut up, and a pair of men's underwear. Jennifer started to become angry that all the details she was sharing had led nowhere, and she was even more frustrated that she could not speak her mind more efficiently, until one day a miracle happened. While Jennifer was yelling in a mute expression of her anger, a tiny sound escaped from the back of her throat. There was hope yet that her voice might return, despite her doctor's disbelief that it was possible for her vocal cords to grow back after the injury she had endured. After some extended time in the hospital, her voice completely returned and she was able to verbally tell her story from start to finish for the first time ever. Jennifer's full story. That night, after she had fallen asleep in her own bed for the first time in a while, she woke up in a stranger's arms while he ran down the sidewalk. She tried to scream, but he covered her nose and mouth with his hand. He quietly told her to calm down and that he was a police officer undercover. He then got into his car and took her onto his lap as he drove away with her. Something inside of her knew that she was in danger, but she was conflicted because she also knew that police were supposed to be good. Because she was just a child, she wanted to believe what he was saying, but the part of her that was scared of the dark knew something was very wrong. In an attempt to calm her down, the man stopped near her local elementary school and told her they would wait for her mother to come fetch her. He said, "Watch the moon will change colors. and that is when your mom will come get you. She watched and waited anxiously for her mother's headlights to arrive so she could know she was safe. The man was drinking, smoking, and offering her candies, which to Jennifer, who was familiar with the stranger danger rule, immediately recognized as a red flag. But then the man said something that confirmed Jennifer's fears. He said, "Oh, it looks like she's not coming," before driving off with her again. At this point, Jennifer was questioning him profusely, almost like an interrogation, to try to catch him out. Eventually, he pulled over to a field just outside the city. Jennifer asked the man, who said his name was Dennis, to prove that he was an officer. She asked him where his badge was and if he had a gun. He told her that his gun was on the back seat, so she stood up and looked into the back. And this is when he began to assault her. He held a pocket knife to her throat and asked if she was scared. He then choked her and sexually assaulted her before slitting her throat. She was too young to understand what was happening to her before she lost consciousness, but the violence of the attack was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. When she regained consciousness, she was being dragged through a field by her ankle, completely naked. And despite being only 8 years old, she did the smartest thing she could and played dead in the hopes of fooling her attacker and surviving. After a while, she felt her body come to a stop as her attacker dropped her legs. Then she heard his footsteps walking away from her as she was left for dead on the top of an anthill. She lay on the anthill in the baking Texas sun for over 12 hours in the worst state anyone could imagine. She tried to scream, but couldn't. So she did the only thing she could muster and lifted her right hand to her cheek. After looking at her hand and seeing the blood, she began losing consciousness, only to be woken up by the burning bites of the fire ants beginning to crawl all over her. Part of her knew she might not survive, but the only thing she could think about were the details of the attack and everything she could remember about the attacker, so that if she made it out of that moment alive, she could catch him. A cold case reignited. After Jennifer regained her voice, she was able to leave the hospital, return home, and even return to school the following year. However, nothing would ever be the same again for her or any other child in Dickinson. Without a suspect behind bars, parents and police knew that there was a dangerous individual on the loose who might be out there ready to attack again. After some years of police patrolling school grounds, the case of Jennifer Schuett went completely cold, and Jennifer was forced to live out the next 18 years of her life without closure for what had happened to her. Until one day, an officer by the name of Tim Cromie called her to say that he wanted to meet her. Upon meeting Cromie, he told Jennifer something that changed her life instantly. He told her, "Jennifer, I will do anything in my power until the end of my career to get you the answers that you need for this case." She finally felt like she had found someone as dedicated to solving her case as she was. Jennifer was determined to help solve her own case because she knew she was the only living witness. With the help of Houston FBI Special Agent Richard Reignited, Cromie immediately sent off all DNA evidence to the FBI DNA lab in Quantico, Virginia, to see if they could find a match in the system. When Jennifer's case was initially opened, DNA testing was not that advanced. But now, new technology would give Jennifer hope of finally catching the perpetrator that left her for dead all those years ago. The analysis took long, taking an entire year to offer any real results. But when the results were in, Jennifer would finally get what she'd been hoping for. At 2:30 a.m. one morning, Cromie received a call from the DNA lab saying, "We got a hit on September 22, 2009. After 19 years, Jennifer's story had faded in everyone's memory, but still, the name sounded too familiar. After finding the piece of paper where Jennifer had written Dennis, Cromie stood in disbelief, as the matching suspect was none other than a Dennis Earl Bradford, who was now 39 years old and married with 2 children. How could such a young, traumatized girl on so much pain medication be so accurate all those years ago? Better yet, the drawing that the sketch artist had done based on Jennifer's description of him, which she could only manage through written notes, was almost an exact copy of his driver's license photo from 1990. The criminal who cried during his confession. Dennis Earl Bradford had attended Dickinson High School in the same area as Jennifer and Elaine's apartment before Jennifer's abduction. He was a young man with little self-control and a bad habit of drinking. During his confession, he says, "She was innocent. I was a sick, deranged, beat-up little punk. I took that little girl out there and I raped her and cut her throat." After the incident in 1990, Dennis went home to his father's house and tried to take his own life. But just as he pulled the trigger, he changed his mind. According to Dennis, he blew a hole in his father's roof, after which he was taken in for psychiatric evaluation and admitted to the exact same hospital as Jennifer while she was still there recovering from what he had done to her. In 1991, he tried to continue on as normal, hoping to shove what he had done under the rug. He was now 21 years old and living in Hot Springs, Arkansas. In September, just over a year after his attack on Jennifer, he went on to meet a young 18-year-old woman by the name of Lisa Kostelik. He drew her in with lies about his sober habits and an undeniable charm, before managing to marry her only 5 months later. Everything was great for the couple until Lisa fell pregnant with their first child, a little boy. Dennis began acting strange and would say unusual things like, "I wish I was dead," after laughing and messing around with her. But Lisa did not think much of it yet. It was only after she fell pregnant with their second child, a little girl, that Lisa began to worry. One day, while Lisa was halfway through her second pregnancy, Dennis began coming on to her sexually. He was acting very strange and said something that sent shivers down her spine. He told her that he was the man responsible for the little girl found in a field a few years back in Dickinson. She got angry, but thought that it was some sick joke. Soon after that, she decided to leave him. He accepted it, but they continued to live together for the children. In 1996, detectives stopped Lisa at their car after analyzing the number plate, informing her that Dennis had allegedly assaulted a woman. He was soon after arrested and charged with kidnapping, then sentenced to 12 years in prison, leaving Lisa and their 2 children to fend for themselves. It was this event that put Dennis on the system, ultimately getting him caught for Jennifer's case. Then, after 3 years, in 2000, he was released for good behavior. After he was released, Lisa decided to move past this bump in the road and allowed him to continue co-parenting their 2 children. Until one day, on the 13th of October 2009, the truth finally came out. Dennis was arrested and brought in for interrogation. Upon talking to Dennis, police asked him if he had ever heard the name Jennifer Schuett, and this was his reaction.
You ever heard the name Jennifer Schuett?
Yes.
Did you ever have occasion to come in contact with her?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
No.
Where is Jennifer now? Shortly after Dennis was arrested and confessed his crimes against Jennifer, she began writing her victim impact statement to finally look her attacker in his eyes and have her say. Her case had a court date of 10th of August, exactly 20 years after she was taken from her bed that night in 1990. However, before he could stand trial for the kidnapping, sexual assault of a minor, and attempted capital murder of Jennifer Schuett, Dennis Earl Bradford hung himself in his jail cell using a bed cover. As the strong-willed woman that Jennifer is, she could not let him get out of hearing her statement. So on the 20th anniversary of her assault, she went to his grave and read it to him anyway. Her statement read, "Dennis Bradford, you chose the wrong 45-pound, 8-year-old girl to try and murder. Because for 19 years, I've thought of you every single day and helped in searching for you. In my heart, I knew you were out there. And now I know, listening to my heart all these years and never giving up on finding you, I was right." As she sat there, she wondered if he could hear her from beyond the grave and whether or not this would give her the closure she needed. But before she could second guess it, a red fire ant bit her, just like the ones that kept her awake that day as she lay dying in the field. To her, this was her sign that this was finally all over, a full circle to end her story. Today, Jennifer has her happy ending with her loving husband, Jonathan Martinez, and their 2 children, Jenna and Jonah, even after doctors told her that the assault rendered her infertile. She uses her voice to speak up for survivors of violent crimes and travels across the country sharing her story. Jennifer likes to say that since the day she miraculously regained her voice in the hospital at 8 years old, after suffering what doctors told her was irreparable damage to her voice box, she hasn't shut up since. Throughout this journey, I've had two main goals, and they were to find the man who kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and attempted to murder me 19 years ago so that he could not hurt anyone else, and to use my voice in telling my story to as many people as I possibly could in hopes that I may encourage other victims of violent crime to stand up and speak out against criminals. Today, I can say very proudly that I have accomplished both of these goals. I hope that my case will remain as a reminder to all victims of violent crimes to never give up hope in seeking justice, no matter how long it may take or how hard it may be. With determination and by using your voice, speak out. You are capable of anything. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment your take down below, and subscribe to the channel. Also, hit that notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case.